Before we begin, this video is sponsored by Vezi. Recently, there has been many changes in my life. Specifically, I bought a house and got a puppy, and so I'm on my feet constantly. However, thankfully for me, the beauty of Vezi footwear is that it's essentially an all-in-one shoe designed to get me through every facet of the day with no reason to take them off. Here I am taking Cheddar out at the scrape of dawn in mushy, wet weather, but now fearless of mud, moisture, cold, and the occasional dog accident because Vezi's genuinely amazing weekend sneakers are designed with Dymatex technology, thus making them 100% waterproof, easy to clean, and most of all, cozy and comfortable all day long. Heck, Cheddar won't stop trying to chew on them because they're also deliciously stylish. After this, when commuting to the office on a lack of caffeine and sleep, I become especially prone to icky city puddles, but they are no match for me when I have Vezi fresh and ready to protect my sleep-deprived ghoulish self from the grueling Irish weather. When paired together with Vezi's overcast jacket, which I also happen to wear indoors because it's so snug, fleecy and warm, and their touchscreen compatible waterproof gloves, Vezi becomes more than just fashion, it's a lifestyle, one that makes the daily grind all the more pleasant. You can support my channel today and navigate the city dog lifestyle like myself with confidence and comfort by going to vezi.com/ryanhollinger to find the perfect blend of style and practicality for yourself. 15 minutes into Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey, I genuinely thought there was a chance. There were some nice visuals, a tongue-in-cheek storybook setup, a playful subversion on the childhood fairy tale fantasy. Yeah, you know what? Maybe it's nowhere near as bad as everyone says it is. Perhaps it's mediocre at best, and everyone is just being hyperbolic about it for internet clout. And then the next 65 minutes happened. I know I'm late to the party on this one, but when Blood and Honey initially released, everyone and their mother jumped on this film because hashtag memes, hashtag algorithm, and I thought, you know what, instead of adding more fuel to an obvious fire, why not just let the dust settle for a year and revisit it with an open mind, removed from all the hype. And yes, even then, I still agree with the consensus that it's bad, however, I kinda see what it's going for, so bear with me on this one. So, to set the scene, at the start of this year, the short Disney classic Steamboat Willie entered the public domain, and naturally given the lucrative market of mascot horror and the general trend of making genre subversions to otherwise lighthearted children's IPs, such as the Banana Splits movies, Squidward's Unaliving, and Christ, does anyone remember Shrek is Love, Shrek is Life? Of course, it took no time for a flood of Steamboat Willie horror adaptations to be announced. However, perhaps the most prolific example of this trend in recent memory, because, well, it literally came out last year, was Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey, a splatter flick adapted from the original children's classic by writer A.A. Milne and illustrator E.H. Shepard about the beloved honey-addicted teddy bear, which entered the US public domain in 2022, thus ending Disney's long-standing ownership of the IP outside their own licensed adaptations. On a budget of $100,000, the film went on to gross over $5 million at the box office, something that would make Blumhouse cream in its pants, and now we have a sequel dropping later this year. Not only that, its success proved to be a calling card for recently turned filmmaker Rhys Frake Waterfield, whose production company intends to produce a shared universe that will incorporate other copyright dubious properties like Bambi and Peter Pan. Now, I don't want to discuss Waterfield too much because judging from a few interviews, his whole thing seems like a bit of a grift to me in the same vein of Asylum, where he just churns out film after film sold on deliberately baity concepts or recognizable IP, but funnily enough, I find his response to the announcement of Steamboat Willie horror adaptations to be quite revealing and showing a noticeable lack of self-awareness. Regarding the flood of adaptations, Waterfield told IndieWire, "I don't know if any of them are going to try to make them good. That getting repeated all the time, it won't have the same kind of hit. It doesn't have the same kind of longevity for what we're trying to do. I personally believe the only way that this becomes sustainable for us making films is to really focus on doing a select few, the ones we think are best, and making them have a really high quality." Now, the thing is, while I wholeheartedly agree with his premise that copyright and public domain are murky waters and you have to account for pre-existing trademarks of each property, to then go on and seemingly position yourself as being some sort of purveyor of integrity for this market shows a lack of self-awareness and even a bit of arrogance when Blood and Honey is nowhere near the quality quality he thinks it is. Maybe I'm misreading it, but I would respect it more if he just embraced the fact that his main motivation was to capitalize on the gimmick rather than act as if his output is above everyone else's intentions. But anyway, let's see it in practice. So when I said I think I get what it's going for, I can see how Blood and Honey blends together this unusual hybrid of grim, twisted, modern fairy tale and exploitation video nasty like the ones you used to find in your local rental store bargain bin. It's sort of akin to the stuff the likes of Puppet Combo are making with the killer nuns, murderous Easter Bunny, and the whole market of schlocky, low-rate slashers, mimicking the Friday the 13th formula of unsuspecting teens being butchered by an obscure local legend. The introduction suggests tremendous satirical potential in the vein of 2015's Krampus, with a tongue-in-cheek reimagining of Winnie the Pooh's origins. There's a crassness to this bastard child version of the original illustration style that establishes immediate discomfort, as Christopher Robin's first encounter with Winnie and his friends innocuously describes them as crossbreeds, or more worryingly, abominations, with our four eventual killers, Winnie, Piglet, Rabbit, and Owl, distinctly being drawn with hollow eyes, unlike Eeyore, whose darkened eyes outcast him as the sole reminder of innocence. It's a nice detail because the story goes that over the years, Christopher would care for the creatures only to one day abruptly leave for university, causing them to fend for themselves in harsh conditions with no food, eventually being forced to consume poor little Eeyore, and regress back to their feral roots with a keen hatred for mankind thanks to Christopher's abandonment. When Christopher returns 5 years later with his fiancée Mary, they're accompanied by whimsical music, a surprisingly lush visual style, and generic children's book dialogue, suggesting a farcical play on the property. From this, you can kinda see why I had some hope. Sure, it's not clever or creative in its setup, but hey, maybe it's going for the same vibe as The Happening, where it's kinda taking itself seriously, but just goofy enough to at least be casually entertaining. Christopher is taking Mary in confidence to meet the boys, as she believes they're just an elaborate fantasy, initially implying that this could go down the route of Christopher being the sole killer, and imagining Pooh and his pals as a figment of his deranged imagination, but thank Christ it bludgeons that theory to death almost immediately. Interestingly, the opening and its later title sequence actually gave me very strong Wrong Turn 1 and 2 vibes, which were films that individually played on those pulpy, exploitation, murderous inbreds in the woods style slashers, which is an angle that Blood and Honey seemingly leans into, as we'll see later. Now, if there's one thing it sure as hell doesn't hold back on, it's the mean-spirited savagery that makes it clear we're in for a very bleak watch, as Mary is soon abruptly murdered and her body incinerated for food, while Christopher is captured and forced to watch in horror. Granted, it is a shame that the latter part is weakened by the fact it's shown through illustration rather than live action, but I accepted it as a tease for further shenanigans down the line, as we cut to a title sequence documenting the numerous disappearances and mutilated remains found around 100 Acre Woods. Where things begin to fall apart is when we're introduced to our protagonist Maria, who is struggling with PTSD after she was attacked by an obsessive stalker while she was asleep. Her vapid therapist suggests that Maria and her friends simply go on a detox weekend to help ease her trauma, but while you'd expect this setup to eventually play into the story as a sort of overcoming your fear by defeating the villain, it genuinely seems to serve no other purpose than to give the characters a contrived reason to be in this situation, so it can ironically mirror Maria's experience when Winnie and the boys attack. It adds nothing to her empty vessel of a character, and there's negative chemistry between her and her friends, as if the actors only met 5 minutes before shooting. All of them exist as pure cannon fodder. They barely share any scenes together to make me believe there's a tangible friendship between them. There is some potential in the two lovers, but that's grasping at straws to say anything nice, because it's ultimately Christopher who has the most amount of character, which is to say, he goes through a grueling amount of shit that I'd be a sociopath if I didn't feel a bit sorry for him. I mean, after all, his fiancée is murdered, burned, mutilated, and eaten before his eyes by his childhood mutant animal friend things, and later we find him being tortured with Eeyore's tail as a whip, and then covered in Mary's blood. Even if he is still a nothing character, being sympathetic of him is the least I can fucking do. I still like the initial atmosphere that sets sets up 100 Acre Woods before the girls arrive at what is supposed to be an isolated cabin in the countryside when it's clearly in a populated neighborhood. It even has the angsty pretty girl of the group be like, yuck, if there's a single bug, I'm going home. Yeah, that attitude would be fair if it was a decrepit cabin in buttfuck nowhere like the opening suggests, but unless you come from royalty, that is a goddamn nice looking house you're staying in. I have no problem with it being set in a lush house because it plays perfectly into an ordinary modern setting that invites peace and tranquility, which is what Maria is looking for, and it masks the fact that horrors lurk hidden out of sight. However, it's contradicted by this great atmospheric setup of dense forestry completely absent of wildlife and ambience. The still camera work, the subtle wind, the creaking of the trees, it all sells how 100 Acre Woods has turned from this place of peace and harmony into this foreboding, poisonous energy due to Winnie and the gang becoming feral monsters in the woods. There is a sense of tangible fear that's instilled in the forest itself, but the fact it never attempts to hide the other houses surrounding the one the girls are staying in makes it impossible to suspend your disbelief that they are truly isolated. The girls even stop at this dingy, dilapidated petrol station as if they're in this utterly abandoned backwood part of Britain, but then to throw them in a seemingly affluent area defeats the point of this mise-en-scene. By the way, as hypocritical as this will probably sound, I'm saying petrol station and not gas station because if there's one thing that got on my tits, it's how Americanized this British film tries to be. Like, oh, Christopher went off to college. Just say university. No one in the UK says college. And when we are referring to one, we call it a tech. There's even a Subaru outside the front of the garage, or at least what I think is a Subaru, so it could not get any more British than that. Anyway, I need to get outside more. I understand the film might be going for this homage to cliche, spooky American backwoods redneck horror. Hell, the mechanic is even American, but it's very jarring how it flip-flops between different cultural nuances. Here's the thing, like I said, I can see it going for this cult 80s video nasty VHS vibe like Slumber Party Massacre, where it's very upfront about going for shock value. For example, the first girl to die has her shirt easily ripped off like it's made of toilet paper, just so that we can see her boobs, and then it's followed up by this big grotesque splatter death, not far off what Terrifier does. I get making it American helps sell it better to other markets, but it's a bold missed opportunity to not just embrace the fact that it's clearly British. In fact, a similar film that came to mind while watching it was the brilliant British backwoods slasher flick The Cottage, where Andy Serkis and League of Gentlemen and Inside Number 9's Reece Shearsmith hide out in a secluded safe house after a kidnapping, which just so happens to be next to a farm that's occupied by a deformed inbred cannibal that has no consequence on the main plot that's established. It's a really funny, violent, well-acted film that takes advantage of starting out as this British crime drama about two feuding brothers, and then twisting into a sort of American-style creature feature like From Dusk Till Dawn. What happens in Blood and Honey is that the girls just suddenly get attacked. There is no meaningful development to get us to the carnage. Things happen, and that's that. Winnie and the gang essentially kill each girl one by one, and the whole thing turns into a bit of an episode of Scooby-Doo where they think Winnie is Maria's stalker. There's even one death that mimics the pool scene from The Strangers Pray at Night and has a pretty gnarly finish. In that sense, if you're in it for the gore, as long as you can look past the awful moments of random CGI that doesn't need to be there, the actual practical effects are pretty decent for the most part. The fundamental problem is that everything is simply a half measure. The characters, story, and emotions are virtually vacant, and it would have gotten away with it if it weren't for those meddling. I mean, if it had fully embraced the farce and just went for pure batshit whimsical insanity. There are a few ambiguous elements that allude to something we never see that I thought was great for world building, specifically what looks to be a ritual of sorts that's never complete. It certainly played for absurdity, just not enough to be worth the bare minimum of everything else. For example, when Maria saves Christopher and they eventually escape into a field, they're confronted by the petrol station attendant and his friends, who end up being these charming, helpful gentlemen who decide to fight Winnie themselves. During the fight, it begins to frame Winnie as some sort of mighty giant who literally bitch slaps the face of one man before summoning a swarm of bees to kill another. Like, why isn't there more of this in the film? If it had more time in the oven to bake better ideas, it could have been a fun drunk watch with friends, especially if Winnie was framed as the protagonist, because I feel feel I should be rooting for him and his friends to be killing despicable, annoying characters, but instead, the whole ordeal is framed from the wrong perspective. Hell, it even tries to make you feel some sympathy for Winnie as he attempts to suppress his happy memories of Christopher, whom he now hates for abandoning him. Like, why not just make a movie where they go to town to hunt Christopher Robin? Like, he's clearly the indirect antagonist to Winnie's side of the story. These girls have nothing to do with anything. Hey, so it's Ryan from the future here editing this video. I wrote this script back in January before the sequel's trailer came out, and turns out that's the actual plot of it, so screw me, I guess. In some respect, if Waterfield sincerely is attempting to mimic trashy video nasty films, I could see him model himself after Jake West, an underground UK filmmaker who made a few niche exploitation films like Evil Aliens and Doghouse that were intended to humorously provoke, but those films drew heavily from Evil Dead and Peter Jackson's early splatter flicks, so there's actual joy in watching them. Waterfield has said that he intended the film to be silly fun and sort of self-aware, but it doesn't really commit fully to it to not seem so self-serious. In the end, after everyone is murdered except Christopher and Maria, Christopher does attempt to seek reason within Winnie, only for Winnie to break his silence in both agony and hatred over Christopher's abandonment, causing him in a shocking twist to kill Maria as Christopher traumatically runs into the forest. It's obviously nowhere near as effective as Hatchet when it comes to abrupt gotcha-style endings, but I do like that it at least maintains the nihilistic subversion of the modern fairy tale by denying us a happily ever after. Despite my general distaste, the groundwork is definitely there for a much better sequel akin to Wrong Turn 2, which stripped down the seriousness of the first film for a much more energetic, gore-centric scenario that just had a lot of fun with the concept. If Waterfield's effort isn't a grift like I think it is, then deep down I can see how it has the faded spirit of a wannabe trauma film, but until he proves himself otherwise, it'll have to settle for being the bastard child of Asylum meets the Sci-Fi Channel. With these kinds of films, I always like to try and give them the benefit of the doubt. As I've said before, I don't think anyone goes out of their way to make a bad film. Sure, there are rare cases where that's true, but I don't think it's the case with this one. There are truly glimmers of potential here, and I am curious to see what Waterfield does with more filmmaking experience, because that's ultimately what he's missing. So until next time, thank you so much for watching, leave your thoughts in the comments below, stay safe, stay away from 100 Acre Woods, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.